appreciate it if you could put your phones on silent. I was going to have a go at him there last night, but he looked so embarrassed. I thought, no, it's taking advantage of a man when he's down. I've got to apologise. I had planned to call in at Bunnings or somewhere and get a spring, compression spring, and I clean forgot. But when you get to my age, you're allowed that. People will pass over those things. But you all got imagination, so you can imagine a spring. Not the extension springs, the ones you put on your tent pegs and so forth. You know, the ones that compress. Alright, so if you're wondering where the parable of the spring is found in Matthew, Mark, Luke and John, it's not in there, alright? This is just my parable. Alright, so for what it is, it's just my view on things, my way of understanding things, you might say. But the way I view children is they come into the world like a compressed spring. All right? They're filled with all sorts of potential. And of course, when you compress a spring, you know, hey, there's some power in here. And there's some potential to do work in here and so forth. Now, if you compress that spring, and then you just released it, what would happen? And this is where I wanted to do the demonstration. But imagine it. Release it, it's going to fly and land who knows where. Now, the Bible says the rod of reproof gives wisdom, but a child left to himself brings his mother to shame. Proverbs 29, verse 15. That's what happens. You release that spring, it just ends up who knows where. Now, if you keep that spring compressed for the next 18, 20 years, and then release it, what's going to happen? Same thing. It'll just fly who knows where, and all the pent-up frustrations of being treated like a child all those years will probably result in some sort of rebellion. So, the raising of young children is not as difficult as in the raising of older children. But you can see the wisdom of God in that He breaks you in. You have your children when they're younger, and you basically can control their environment and pretty much everything in their life. And that's good. We feel secure in that because we're in control. But of course, we get some experience. I mean, we're all novices when we start off. You know, hopefully we learn. And so when we come down the track a little bit, hopefully we've learned a few things about parenting, and that will help us in this next stage. But when they get a little older, of course, you no longer have the control that you once had. They go off to school, and they get mates at school. You're not always aware of who it is they're mixing with, and they have more freedoms to travel. They can hop on their push bike or whatever, and they can, you know, go miles away and so forth. Things that they never did when they were really young. And so, requires more wisdom as the children get older. The art of child raising, as I see it, is that the child comes into the world like a compressed spring, full of potential. And the art is in just slowly releasing the pressure on that spring so that when you take your hand away, it'll sit there stable and not ready to fly off the handle. As I said last night, I've preached desirable thing. Now, the value or nature of anything is really the sum total of the nature or the value of the things that make it up. So, with the happiness of a home, it's really the sum total of the happiness of the members of that home. If all the members of the family are happy, then you've got a happy family. It's pretty simple, I think. So you could say happy people equals happy family. So let's just start by saying, how can you raise happy kids? What I found in reading a survey one time was they asked parents what they wanted for their kids. The most common answer was this: we want our kids to be happy. That was number one on the list. It wasn't money, it wasn't a good job or anything like that. I want my kids to be happy. And I think that's a noble idea. The thing about it is this, that all the research that they've done on this is that happier kids are more likely to turn out to be successful, accomplished adults. On average, happy people are more successful than unhappy people, both at work and in love. Happy people, they get better performance reviews, they have more prestigious jobs, and they earn higher salaries. They are more likely to get married, and once married, they are more satisfied with their marriage. So, I'm going to go through just 7 things. I tried to condense this down and not make you have to be so long-suffering. Just 7 things that I'm going to mention in this respect. First statement, I'm addressing the parents. Parents, be happy yourself. If you want a happy home, you've got to start with happy parents. Because you see, to a large extent, the children's take on life will mirror yours, because you see, they're watching you. They spend more time with you than anybody else, really. And if you're unhappy, they will most likely learn an unhappy approach to life. And of course, if you then see that your children are unhappy, that will make you more unhappy. And it becomes like this ever-increasing spiral. And of course, the reverse is true. If you're happy, and you notice my children are happy, then that makes you happier. And the process goes on. There was a Greek, Alcibiades was his name, and he was a very gifted man. He was also a very unscrupulous man. But the thing that he was renowned for was the fact that he was a very unhappy man. And people couldn't work out why. I mean, he had basically a lot of the things in life that people chase after, and he had travelled a lot and had seen places that many people in that day and age would never see. And somebody asked Socrates, the philosopher, why Alcibiades was so unhappy. And Socrates said, it's because he always takes himself with him. And we do, don't we? Wherever we go, whatever we do, we take ourselves with us. Newspaper article told of an 80-year-old man, so follow the age of Ian here. He kept a detailed record of what he had done during his life. You can make some comparisons, Ian. You can let us know later on. And he worked it out that he had spent 26 years in sleep. He had spent 21 years working. He had spent 228 days shaving. 140 days paying bills. I can identify with that. He also spent over 26 days scolding his children. And he had spent 2 days yelling at dogs. He had only spent 26 hours laughing. It's hard, it's sad to sort of think that this man, he spent as many days scolding his children as the hours that he had spent laughing. Ecclesiastes chapter 9 and verse 9 counsels us, live joyfully with the wife whom you love all the days of your life. Proverbs 5:18, same thing, rejoice with the wife of thy youth. God wants us to be happy, you know. Some people have the idea if you're a Christian, well, you know, you've got to walk around and your chin's dragging on the ground and you've got to have this holy, pious look about you. That's good advertisement for a Christian, isn't it? In contrast, Proverbs 21:19 says, it's better to dwell in the wilderness than with a contentious and an angry woman. So, you women, you beware. But anyway, it seems that this is a common theme in the wisdom literature. Living happily with your wife is also important because you're modelling an approach that your children will most likely pick up and take with them into their marriage. So don't fight in front of the kids. If you want to have a barney, do it privately. And there are times when, yeah, you want to have a barney. I'm not talking about fisticuffs or anything, but you disagree about something and you've got to solve this. But don't bring the kids into it, you know. Extensive research has established that there's a substantial link between mothers who feel depressed and negative outcomes in children. Parental depression actually seems to cause behavioural problems in kids. It also makes parenting less effective. The interesting thing I found about this research is that happy parents are statistically more likely to have happy children, but they couldn't find any genetic component in them. In other words, it wasn't because of any sort of inherited genes or whatever. It was purely a nurture thing, not a nature thing. So, take some time to have some fun, you parents. Have some fun with friends. And of course, in the church, we've got the optimum ability to be able to do this. Spend time with people, you know, your age group, that are parents themselves, and have fun together. Do you know that laughter is contagious? It is. True. Have you not read that the Bible says in Proverbs 12:25 that heaviness in the heart makes it stoop? Now I read a more modern version that sort of put it more in the vernacular, and it translated this way: anxiety in the heart of man causes depression. We probably relate more to that than the idea of the heart stooping. Have you not read that a merry heart does good like a medicine? That's in the Bible, Proverbs 17:22. Ever notice when you're watching a sitcom on the TV that they either have canned laughter or it's filmed in front of a live audience? They do that on purpose. Why? Because laughter is contagious. It's contagious. My father, he spent 26 years as a widower. Mum died early and he lived on for another 26 years. Lived by himself up in Rockhampton, and us children, we lived at other places, and so we would only ever get to spend time with him when we travelled to see him and so forth. And while we weren't there, he would never ever watch a funny sitcom. And he says, I just don't enjoy it on my own. I didn't understand that until I began thinking about that and reading about that. But when we came, he loved sitting down with us watching something funny. Laughter's contagious. Neuroscientists, they believe that hearing another person laugh, it sort of triggers mirror neurons in the region of our brain, and it makes listeners feel as though they're actually laughing themselves. So, laugh. And laugh so your kids can hear you laughing. It's a gift that God gave us. He wants us to use it, you see. And you dads, this is important. Get some dad jokes. Now your kids are going to pretend like that, you know, you've got no sense of humour at all, and their eyes are going to roll back in their heads when you tell them. But inside they're laughing. They really are. More importantly, it creates good vibes in the house, you know. You know, and when our family, our extended family gets together, and if there's somebody from outside the family who's also there, it's not uncommon for them to say, when you people get together, it's loud, isn't it? And it's true, we like it loud. I don't know what the neighbours think sometimes, you know. That's their problem. We're having a good time, and the dominant sound in all the loudness is laughter. It's important. There was a man who wanted his home to be happy, and he recognised that the way he approached life and the moods that he had were important to the house and its happiness. So he had a worry tree. And the worry tree, it grew down in the backyard near the shed where he parked his car. So when he came home from work, and he had a very important and stressful job, and there were a lot of things, you know, still going through his brain, and so he would park the car, and then he would come over to the worry tree, and he would physically do this. He would, as if he was lifting a load from his shoulders, and he would put it on the tree. And he would say, you just wait there till tomorrow. And all the stresses from work and so forth, he'd leave there and he'd go inside and spend a pleasant evening with the kids and the family and so forth. And when he came out of the house in the morning, he would go back to the tree and pick it up and put it on his shoulders, and he'd start focusing on, you know, what pressures he was going to have to face at work on that particular day. So parents, you be happy yourself. Number 2, train your children in the way of the Lord. I was pleased that Ephesians 6 was read, because I was going to read it anyway. That Deuteronomy 6 and verse 7 was the same instruction to the Jewish people of old. Train up your children. And so I would suggest to you that in sort of bringing this into some sort of practical reality, that you plan devotionals and classes, plan them into your schedule, rather than just waiting for an opportune time, or, you know, just waiting for things to happen, because oftentimes they just won't happen unless you take steps to plan these things. We make time for other things, and so we should make time for spiritual training. And you can't train your child if you haven't trained yourself. So be at every church meeting that you can possibly be there. Make sure your children are there too. Set them the example. You see, what do? I see this so often. Monday morning rolls around and little Johnny says, "Oh, I've got a sore finger." "Oh, poor Johnny, you better stay home." You don't do that, do you? "Show me your finger." Did you ever do this one? I tried this when I was a kid. If you get a boiled egg or a golf ball or something and you put it under your arm and just hold your arm against your side there, you can go up to Mum. "Mum, I'm sick. I've got no pulse." It works. You can't feel your pulse. My mother, she was pretty savvy. She'd just pull my arm. The golf ball would drop out and, you know, I was sprung. But parents are wise to a lot of this stuff, you know. Johnny doesn't want to go to school, but you say, "Nah, you're going to school." We insist on it because we think it's important, you know. But when it comes to Sunday or Wednesday night or something, we kind of change the rules. If we're concerned about their secular education, and so we should be, we need to be as concerned, if not more, about their spiritual education. One of the things we did, we believed in education, still do, and two of our boys went to university. One of them got a PhD, so they were into education. But we would give them Bible homework when they were at school. When they came home from school and, you know, had a bite to eat and all that stuff, they had to do their Bible homework first. And then they did their secular homework. It was just something that we tried to impress upon them that, hey, Bible's important. School's important, but Bible is more important. Police department once drew up a list, and they entitled the list 12 Rules for Raising Delinquent Children. I was interested in this because this is it's a secular organisation. It's at the coalface really with juvenile behaviour and all of that. Very first rule they had was begin with infancy to give the child everything he wants. In this way he will grow up to believe that the world owes him a living. I thought, yeah, that makes sense. I agree with that. I was interested to see that the third one in their list of 12 was this: never give him any spiritual training. Wait till he's 21 and then let him decide for himself. I thought, that's really interesting. From a police department, realising the importance of spiritual training. It's important to their spiritual development, but it's also important to happiness. Learning about God and His love and His providential care, that promotes optimism, which is essential to happiness. Happiness and optimism, they go together, all right? So it's when we think that there are no better tomorrows, that's when depression sets in. That's when happiness goes away. Years ago, it used to be an older person's problem. People who suffer from depression, they were usually 40 and older and so forth, but in the last 40 or so years, we've seen a change in that. Depression has become part of a young person's domain, and we're trying to deal with a scourge of juvenile suicide and things of this nature. There's a song, I think it's number 464, it's called Because He Lives. You've seen that one here? Yeah. Good song. In the second stanza it says, how sweet to hold a newborn baby and feel the pride and joy he gives, but greater still, the calm assurance this child can face uncertain days because he lives. You know? And we have, and I mentioned this in the last lesson, we have a generation of children who are growing up absolutely terrified of the future. We're all going to die! You people, you've ruined our world! Oh, woe is us! You know? Spiritual instruction is the antidote to that. You say, well, how is that possible? It's simple. Romans 15 verse 4, for example. The things that were written aforetime were written for our learning, that we, through comfort and patience of the Scriptures, might have hope. So, don't underestimate the impact of them learning about how God has worked in the lives of people of old, Abraham and Isaac and Jacob and David, and all these stories that are part of a Sunday school curriculum. That's also important to happiness, because you see, they begin to learn there is a God in heaven, and there is a God who works, and there is a God who can providentially operate in your life and make all things work together for good. And when you have children who have none of that, all they see is the doom-saying attitudes of other people and so forth, and then that's all they have to go on. And so they think, well, what's the point? See? Bible education. It's important to hope. The antidote of depression, and the family, the friend of happiness. Number 3, you parents, don't expect perfection from your children. Don't expect perfection. I know that as parents, we want to do a good job as parents, and that's right. And perhaps you're afraid, my children are going to embarrass me. Well, get used to it. They will embarrass you. But that's all right. It's part of living. But there's a way of living called vicarious living. And the word vicarious, it may seem familiar to you because we talk about the vicarious suffering of Jesus Christ, meaning that Jesus suffered on the behalf of others. Well, there are people who sort of live that way. Some people don't live their own life, but they live their life through the lives of others. And it takes on many forms. There's the person who buys every scandal sheet that they can find to find out how the rich and the famous are living. And they want to live like they live and have their values and dream to be rich like them. And then they want to see what the latest fashion is, and so they want to buy that fashion. And that's the way that they live their life. It's a fantasy life, and they're glued to every soap opera that comes on the TV. But there's an aspect of this where parents can see their children as a second chance to live their own life. They look at their own life and they say, well, I've made a lot of mistakes, you know, but I am now going to relive my life through my children, and they will not make the mistakes that I made. And there's a certain aspect of that of course is right. If we made some stupid mistakes in our youth, and we did, it's only right and proper that we should counsel our children against those things, because we've learned the hard way and so on. And so there are people, though, who seem to have this idea that imperfect parents can produce perfect children. No. The world only knows one sort of parent, and that's the imperfect parent. And it only knows one sort of child, and that's the imperfect child. And we have to live with that. So, when you have the situation, the children then can never do enough to please the parents. If the children overcome some, you know, big flaws and issues in their life, they can still never do enough to please the parent, and the parent is always nagging them. And so the child never feels approved, never feels like their parents love them and so forth, and many of these children just give up. What's the point in trying? Everything I do, you know, I'm poo-pooed for it. In our reading, Ephesians 6, you might have noticed there, if you've got the old versions, it would say that fathers, he says, do not provoke your children to wrath. More modern texts will have something like this. Do not exasperate your children. And that's easy to do. You can knock the stuffing out of them if you are a perfectionist. You know. So, summarize, parents have a right to expect effort from their children, but they do not have a right to expect perfection from their children. Number 4, have fun. Paul enumerates a truth in another context in 1 Corinthians 13, verse 11. He says, you know, when I was a kid, he says, I used to think like a kid, and I used to speak like a kid. And, you know how it is. That's all you can do when you're a kid, you know. And we have to remember that when we're parents. They have a child's perspective on life and happiness, and they haven't learned a more mature perspective. And so as we get older, we put those things aside and we realise, hey, life is more serious than that. Life has its consequences. Eternity is long, and so we adopt a more mature view on life. And that's good and right and proper. For a child, you've got to identify with them in their concepts. So a big part of what they consider to be happiness is having fun. All right? And probably that's 90% of happiness. There's other things like, you know, having some lollies and all the rest, and getting a hug from mum and dad or whatever. But having fun is a big proportion of what they see as having a happy life. So, you mothers and fathers, you've got to become childish. You've got to get into their world. So, a couple of examples. In our household, one of the big hits every night was a chook ride. You don't know what a chook ride is, do you? That was their term for it. When it was time for them to go to bed, I'd pick them up by the ankles, walk through the house, with them hanging upside down. When we got to their bed, I'd give them a bit of a swing and then just let them go, fall on the bed. And I couldn't get away with not giving them a chook ride. I mean, this was fun. This was good. This was, you know, what living was all about. We also had things called monster nights. I don't know, the neighbours thought they never looked out their window or whatever. But a monster night was when all the lights of the house would be turned off and I would go outside. Front door and the back door would be closed and the kids would be in the house. And the monster is coming. And I'd be outside the house and I'd pick up little stones and I'd throw them on the roof. And I'd pick up a stick and I'd just walk along the side of the house, bang, 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 bang. The monster's out there. And they knew that any time soon a door might open or a window might open and the monster will enter into the house. Oh, that's when it got really scary. You know. As I said, I hope my neighbours didn't see me doing this outside. But anyway, come in and then I'd be sneaking through the house and they'd be trying to hide in the dark, and it's all very childish. That's all right. It's all right. It's not wrong to have playtime. If you've got a backyard, or if you haven't got a backyard, go down to the local park and kick a footy. Take a few stumps and a bat and go down and have a game of cricket with them. Take them fishing. You know, it's not wrong. There was a researcher doing some research one time, and he was reading the diaries of a father and son. Both the father and the son had kept extensive diaries in their life. The father was a very busy man, and he was too busy for his own good, and rarely spent time with his children. And finally, one day, he decided to take his son fishing. So he read the diary of the boy, and this was the greatest day of the boy's life. Dad took me fishing. And he thought, I wonder what the father's perspective on this was. And so he looked up the same date in the father's diary. You know what it said? Took my son fishing. A wasted day. Because his whole life was wrapped up in his work and all the rest of it, and he had no idea on how happy his boy was that day to go fishing with his dad. So, have fun. You know what happens? When you establish good memories, it's true in our household, when you get together later on, years and years later, those good times, they come to the front. Do you remember the time when, such and such? Do you remember? And those fun times, they're a key part of what makes us up and of our happy memories and so forth. Number 5, establish some family traditions. One of the things I recommend is to use meal times for things other than eating. Now, in Deuteronomy 6:7, when the Jewish parent was being instructed there, he was told to instruct his children in every aspect of their daily activity. When you're walking down the road, or when you're sitting, when you're lying down. Meal times is a perfect time because I don't know about you, but life can get pretty busy. You've got kids that are going to school, and maybe they have to catch a bus, whatever it is, and it's just bedlam a lot of the time. People preparing to go and come and so forth. We found that the time that we had was at the evening meal. That's when, everything settles down. And so, my advice to you is, when you're sitting there, having your meal, turn the TV off. Now, when you get old and crusty like us, you may want to sit in front of the TV while you're, having your crackers or whatever. But when your kids are home, use the meal time with the TV off so you can talk. One of the things that we had our children do as part of their spiritual homework was that every day they were to read a chapter of the Bible, and then they were to make a précis of that chapter and write it in a book. This gave them other skills like writing and spelling and so forth, but also being able to look at a bunch of information and condense it down to its bare bones. And I would look at that from time to time. I didn't do it every day, I just trusted them to do it. But every so often I would just say, Rick, go and get me your book. So he'd go back into his bedroom and bring out his book, and I'd just have a look through and see what he'd been up to. And I think I can remember on one occasion where Travis, he got a little slack, and he was a few days behind, so he had to catch up. But spend that time as a family. And we used to do things because we thought this was fun, especially when visitors came. I didn't know whether I should tell you this, but I thought, why not? offended. But I would sit up at the head of the table, what we call the head of the table, and Mum would sit over on the side next to me near the kitchen. Well, it makes sense. And the kids would sit down towards the end of the table and so forth, and if, say, one of the boys said, "Can I have the peanut paste, please?" then I'd say, "Sure," and I'd just throw it to him. And there's a way of throwing where you can throw it and keep it vertical all the way down. Catch it. It's not good manners, but it was just a thing that we had because we liked to shock visitors with this. When Travis brought his girlfriend home, I thought, here's the perfect time to do this. So she's sitting there at the table and somebody asked for Vegemite or whatever, and I said, "Sure," and I just threw it. She was sitting there with this Vegemite. What sort of a house is this? But it relaxes people, and they get to see, well, yeah, these people have a bit of fun, you know, and so forth. But the table is a good time to establish traditions, and I was interested to read of studies that show that kids who eat dinner with their family are more emotionally stable and less likely to use drugs and alcohol, and they get better grades at school. It says also they have fewer depressive symptoms, particularly among adolescent girls. And another interesting thing to me was that the study showed that family dinners are actually even better than reading to your kids in preparing them for school. All right, number 6, teach self-discipline. This is the object of parental discipline. You know, you don't want to go through life just disciplining your kids all the time, you know. You want that to taper off. The quicker the better. So the object of parental discipline is, of course, so that the children can grasp the concept of self-discipline. You want to imbibe into them, I guess, this idea: if I control myself and make good choices, then things will turn out better for me. And it is said that self-discipline is more predictive of success than intelligence or anything else for that matter. Often children with high intelligence fail at university. It's not through lack of intelligence, it's because they haven't disciplined themselves on study. I remember one of my boys one time, he was starting to develop a habit, so I took him out in the backyard. And mine was never ever a manicured lawn. I mean, I tolerated weeds. If they were green, you could stay. As long as you could mow them, that was fine. So I pointed to a little weed, just a few little shoots coming up, and I said, "Pull that out." And he pulled it out easily. So then I just walked around a bit more, and I saw another weed which was a little bigger, more firmly established. I said, "Pull that one out." He yanked it and so forth and got it out. Then I walked a bit further and I said, "Now, pull that one out." And it was a big weed, had a great root system and all the rest of it, and he couldn't pull it out. Of course, you know where I'm going with this. So I explained to him it's easier to conquer your bad habits at the inception, because if you let these things become a part of the pattern of your life, you'll get to the point where, hey, these things will dominate your life. You won't be able to eradicate them without a lot of effort and so on. Number 7, the scriptures that deal with happiness, they apply as much, if not more, in the family as they do in the outside world. In other words, the things that we learn as Christians on how to operate in the world and behave ourselves in the world, that applies in the home too. It's not just when you're out there on show, you know, in the public arena. These principles apply inside the home. Take, for example, in Matthew 5, we have what are called the Beatitudes. The word for, if you've got an old version, it'll say blessed. I think more modern versions pretty universally say happy. It's a Greek word, makarios, which means, the way they used it, the Greeks, was, oh, the bliss of the gods. Is that kind of word? Jesus, of course, was not using that word to subscribe to the idea of polygamy or anything like that, or many gods. But he used that word because it meant the idea of extreme happiness. And the vital thing to notice in the Beatitudes is that you cannot find happiness by seeking it as a commodity. Even in the American Constitution, it talks about the pursuit of happiness. And there's nothing wrong. Do you want to be happy, or do you want to be unhappy? Well, it's a no-brainer, isn't it? I want to be happy. So, the pursuit of happiness, legitimate thing in life. Many people think, I want to buy happiness. You know, if I only get enough money, I'll be happy. Or if only I can make myself more beautiful, I'll be happy. And so on and so forth. And Jesus is saying, no. You don't seek after happiness as you might seek after a commodity. It's not found that way. He says what you do is he says you seek after other things, and then you find that you're happy. It's a serendipity. It's a result of seeking other things. And of course he goes on to sort of say, this is the sort of thing that you should seek after if you want happiness. This works in the family. He says, blessed or happy are the poor in spirit. So he says, if you're not egocentric, that's going to be helpful for you. It's going to be helpful for the home. Blessed are those that mourn, he says. And he's talking there about an awareness of sin and godly sorrow. Then he goes on to say, blessed are the meek.